Hi, Adam. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good. We're so glad that we've managed to pin you down. I know you're a busy person.
Uh, well, I'm no more busy than other people who also work hard in the week.
And work hard in school. That's another thing.
Mm.
So our first big question that I love to ask every guest on the podcast, and actually it's a question I've started asking everyone since I began working for role models.
I'm sure they love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who is your role model and why?
Oh, that's a tough question. You could have pre-warned me with that one. I suppose the first response is I don't have a role model. Because I think there's probably a few role models.
Mhm.
That's the first answer, and then I suppose if I had to pick one, do I have to choose one person who could plausibly be one of
I
my role
mean,
models?
some people they go for a bit of a collective, they go for more
Yeah,
than one person. That's fine. I'm willing to let you away with that.
I think I'll probably do a bit of a cop out and just say my parents would probably be some of my role models. They're both very different characters, but each in their own way are role models. I'll have been role models.
Love that. And how do you think they would feel about that, about knowing that they have inspired you in that way?
I think they'd. Yeah, I think it's always nice when you get praise from a child. So I think they'd probably, you know, be satisfied and then move on.
And that leads us nicely into my next question. So, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, your memories of growing up? How was that for you?
Yeah, good. I think I was very fortunate with my upbringing. A lot of love and stability, and sort of range of experiences that were um, I think some of my early experiences maybe were sometimes where I was put out of my comfort zone a little bit. Whether that was my older sisters cross dressing me, or whether that was my father sort of forcing us on very long walks in the South Downs, sort of 16 miles in the autumnal rain.
I think
And
that's
that being a
dad
challenge, but
duty,
also
isn't
that
it?
being a sorry,
That's a dad duty. I remember my dad doing that.
yeah,
It's like, there's no such thing as bad weather. You're just dressed badly. Come on.
yeah, that's a good line. That yeah. So yeah, very sort of positive experiences, and it's interesting as I sort of you know to read things and watch things. It's amazing how fundamental your childhood is in terms of shaping who you are and your experiences, and how it can lay a solid foundation, but how unfortunate it can make things very challenging for you. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And then, we talked a little bit about this in your bio and in your intro. So, did you always know as a child that you would go into working in education, ultimately became a teacher? What do you think was your inspiration for that?
I think I don't think always. I think um, I didn't really think about job until fairly late on in uh, school or university. I think I quite liked writing, and I sort of thought teaching was maybe a good thing to start off with. But I didn't have a plan. I just thought that could be a good uh, first thing to do. And then the program I did called Teach First
Mm.
kind of allows you to do that as a first thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there a specific teacher in mind when you were going through your teacher training where you thought that's the teacher I wanna be like, or this is an example of the teacher that I feel like I want to be?
No, I think it's more you take certain qualities from something you remember, and then you take those and sort of put those together. Maybe who you want to parts of who you want to be as part of your teacher profile.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then if we reflect back upon, we talked about your childhood, And do you feel as though your education experience, so particularly your schooling, secondary schooling, higher education, did that prepare you for life? Do you feel that that prepared you for life and also for the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I suppose I don't think your institutional education is ever going to be sufficient. It's partly what you get in the sort of the home, and your wider experiences beyond school. But uh, I'd say I'd say so. I think so. I think it's well, I suppose probably not entirely sufficient, but I'd say as good as it got relatively compared to other sort of places in the UK. Um, so I think there was this academic side of things, and then I think there was the character side of things that was
Mhm.
molded as well. Yeah.
That's really, really nice. And it's interesting that you say that you do feel as though your education helped to shape your character because we have a lot of people come on here and they say, I don't feel like I was prepared, or I feel like I wasn't inspired to be a risk taker, or inspired to go in other career directions, or challenge myself. What is it do you think that your school did well in terms of preparing you as a person and as an individual to step out into the world?
Um, well, I think the subjects, I suppose, give quite a good foundation. And they're useful. I do think it was very narrow at A level, 16 to 18, and also at university. It's just insanely narrow how you have to do one subject at maybe three at A level, and then if you're not doing IB, that is the International Baccalaureate, which is six subjects, and then at university you have to do sort of one subject. Maybe you do dual honours, but it's quite very baffling that you that you can't have more a broader education at higher education. But I suppose I thought I got a bit of a foundation in sort of core subjects, other than perhaps maths, which I have always found fiendishly hard. But I
I think
think it
all
was,
writers say that.
yeah,
They can get the words together on the page, but forget
yeah.
fractions, forget it.
But I think, I think it's probably those things outside the classroom that I think were useful and powerful. So those those experiences, those challenges. Whether it was someone, it would have been early winter of year 12, about 14 years ago, listening to a guy called Rob Lilwall. I don't know what he's doing today, but he did a walk through. It's called Walking Home from Siberia, and he kind of walked home from Siberia with a sledge, and he said various things, and he's quite Christian, which I'm not, and that it's interesting to hear that how that drove him. But I think it was just that idea of finding out about someone who has done something fairly unusual, and that being something to kind of open your mind.
Hmm.
Or I suppose it's things you kind of listen to beyond the classroom and find out about, and then I suppose it's things experienced as well. So my last year at school, and then actually at university, because I sort of ran at university, did something called Tough Guy,
Hmm.
where you have to sort of do some sort of 10-mile cross country and then like a salt course in January in like Wolverhampton when
Oh,
it's
yikes.
very icy.
January, terrible.
You have to like go underwater, go under like wooden planks underwater. But those kind of uh, the experiences of challenge do make you a more resilient person. Yeah,
Definitely. So moving on from that, do you have, you talked about that 18-year-old, that sixth former doing tough guy. Do you
yeah.
have any advice that you would give to your younger self if you could sit down with 17-year-old Adam?
I think probably there's one. I think this is a character related thing. I think there's one about not caring so much what other people think about you and not being so insecure. I think I was fairly insecure in my appearance because I looked very young for my age, and I was quite short, very short, and was a late developer. So I think I was very conscious of looking very young and caring too much about what people thought about me. I think and that was 10 plus years ago, right? I think today's teenagers have it far worse with social media and the constant social comparison that is encouraged through the social media platforms. So I think that's probably one thing. Don't care so much about what other people think about you.
Yeah, exactly. Because ultimately, what can that do for you as a person? I love that.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like I've been reading a lot of your writing in preparation for this interview, and it's really excellent. I recommend it to any of our listeners. I feel like we're quite aligned because a lot of what you talk about in the education sphere is about creating a culture at school that can develop students as well-rounded individuals beyond the classroom. And at Role Models, that's what we do. We're on a mission to improve the mental health of the next generation. And I mean, the statistics are very clear. There's a mental health epidemic. Ill mental health amongst young people is at an all-time high, and I'm really interested because you're on the front lines of this. You're a teacher every day, and what do you feel like the big issues are facing young people that might be causing this?
Well, from my understanding, I suppose like my understanding of what young people face, I suppose, is partly through things that I sort of read and listen to because I'm interested in education more generally, and then what I see in front of me day to day in school. I think I think one angle of it does have to be social media. I think the psychologist Jonathan Haidt, um, he researches mental health, among other things, said that social media isn't just a correlate of teenage depression; it's a cause of teenage depression, and that there's a very strong link between amount of time spent on social media and likelihood of showing depressive symptoms. So I think that is a really big aspect of it. And someone called Susan Lin wrote a book, and she said, the tech companies are in a war for our attention and our children's attention. So I think the online world is something that I read about, and also I don't really, because in school kids aren't on their phones,
Yeah.
but in my pastoral role I occasionally see the consequences of it, and also I just know that kids are hooked on their phones, and when they are allowed their phones, and that's more the older kids, when they're allowed their phones, say in lunchtime, they're going to be on them rather than necessarily socialising
Mm-hmm.
as much as maybe we'd like them to. So I think the sort of the online stuff is huge. And I suppose within school, I think the pressure can get to kids a lot
Yeah.
of doing well.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, that academic pressure. And do you think that comes from the nature of being at school itself and how it's, sometimes the status comes from how clever you are, how well you're doing, or do you think is that coming from outside? Is that from parents, cost of
Yeah,
living?
well, I think it's better than the inverse. It's definitely, and unfortunately, some schools will be in this situation where some kids will care in the school about education, but some don't really care at all about their qualifications and their future. And there'll be a range of reasons for that. So I suppose I'm quite fortunate to be in a school where the kids, most of the kids and most of the parents are brought into education. But I think it probably is a sort of fear of sort of failure, and you know education perhaps has quite a functional role in their perspective, as in like education is a route to the next thing. And if I don't pass this route, then I'm not in a good situation. I suppose that maybe exposes an issue that education is seen as so functional rather than as something which is valuable in itself and also develops in other ways other than just giving you credentials and qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of the narrow view on it whenever it should be about so much more. And going back to kind of mental health and the issues that kids are facing, what do you feel can be done systematically about that. So I know role models where we feel that we're very passionate about the fact that it's too late to intervene when a child is in crisis. At that point,
Yeah,
that it's gone too far, and I feel like our system relies on that process a bit too much. We're about prevention, quality well-being education from as young as possible, and I just wonder, is there a place for this in the school curriculum? I don't want to feel like I'm being one of those people who say schools need to do this as well as all the other things we expect schools to be able to transform. But is there a space for that? Are our PSHE lessons, for example, do they cut it?
yeah. So I think I definitely agree that it being proactively done is much better than it being done reactively, as when you say students are in a crisis situation. Um, I think the system is a challenge because there's not enough resource to provide, say, the counsellors that would help. And I think although proactivity is good, you do need to have a good sort of counselling system because that is very helpful. I know lots of my students find it very helpful, but I think you know the challenge with the proactivity thing is with PSHE lessons or equivalent, it's not prioritised. So you might sort of do it as a bolt-on day, but as a teacher, you aren't going to prioritise planning those lessons, or you might just get an email with some PowerPoints and you go through them the next day. There's not the incentive to care about it because there's not the resource. There's not the sort of the school isn't paying people a sort of bolt-on really to do that properly. Well, it might be a small bit for one person, and there's no accountability for it.
Yeah.
So there's less of an incentive. Maybe that's a bit cynical, but I think teachers definitely do care about their students' well-being, and they wouldn't be in education if they didn't. But the issue is that the offering is doesn't get the time or thought it sort of deserves.
Mm. And
Yeah.
do you think it's something that we talk a lot about a hidden curriculum? So a lot of schools have a really noble aim and have it built into their ethos that when they're teaching a history lesson or a maths lesson, they are developing resilience or they're developing collaboration skills because kids are working together. Do you think that's sufficient in terms of building those skills like teamwork?
I think you can refer to the sort of school values, and occasionally I might say something about sort of aiming high, which I think is one of my school's values in a lesson if a students are sort of struggling. But no, I think it needs to be supplemented by something more sort of meaningfully timetabled in.
Mm.
But ultimately, what schools will say they care about education in a broad way, but if you want to see what a school prioritizes, look at their timetable because that's where your value and where your priorities lie. And if you have nothing to do with well-being in the day to day or in the week to week, then that says that you don't really care about it
Yeah,
enough.
that's a really interesting way to look at that. I like that. Um, I read your piece, The State of the State Sector. Again, it's another piece I really recommend. And you talked about the fact that there's so much focus on how to do things, how leaders should embed well-being, or how you can very quickly motivate your staff. And a lot of that is related to Ofsted because a lot of schools are bound by the fact that they want to get the Ofsted outstanding rating and they very quickly need to implement these things to tick those boxes to get that rating.
Yeah.
But you touched on the importance of the culture of a school building and how this is key to shaping students, whether it's for adulthood or their future career. And I was really interested to know if you could describe or wave your magic wand, the ideal school culture. What would that look like for you?
Yeah, that's exciting question. I suppose. Well, I preface it with saying that if you are going to build a school culture, it needs to and start from scratch or reinvent. Because the issue is most schools in the UK aren't starting from scratch. Most of them do are in a situation where they've been running for X number of years. So I think if you, when you do that, give it enough thought and care, and have a wide amount of inputs to inform thinking. I suppose there was I've I read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and also got to visit his school, the
So
Lyceum,
cool.
which is basically just like an archaeological site in Athens. But he had a pretty compelling sort of list of what schools should be about. He sort of spoke about developing the complete human personality. He said that educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And he said things like preparing students to be citizens, helping students develop practical wisdom about right and wrong, developing rounded intellect, helping students think about happiness. So there is some of the sort of key staples of schools today, like about intellect and academia, but it's just a much more sort of comprehensive list, and it sort of exposes how um, you know education and schooling have become quite divorced
Yeah,
today.
definitely. Really cool that you visited one of the world's oldest, if not the oldest school. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it claims to be the original one, but obviously hard to verify.
Hard to corroborate that one.
Yeah,
I'll take his word for it. It's
yeah,
Aristotle. It's fine. And another theme that I kind of found in your writing was about behavior management,
yeah,
which is so interesting to me because I trained as a teacher,
yeah.
and behavior management was just a cornerstone in what we learned about. And I
Mm,
guess I never really questioned, why do we do that, or are there alternatives to this? And I guess I never really dug any deeper than that because it was one of the things we had lectures on from first year. How
mm.
do you manage the behavior of your students? So what do you think it's time? And this is something that you suggest in your writing. Is it time for schools to rethink this, and why, or how can they do that?
Yeah, so I think it's because work in a school now where the students you serve are from a relatively deprived cohort, and I taught briefly at independent sector a couple of years ago, and the students do have they have different behaviours, and the reality is if you weren't to apply behaviour management techniques in certain state schools, there would be total disorder,
Yeah.
and students wouldn't learn. So you definitely need strong behaviour management in schools. I think it's easy for armchair critics to criticise strictness, but ultimately it's terrible for the students, but also the teacher well-being if you don't have clear rules and boundaries. So I think it definitely has a role, but I don't think it's sufficient. I think the other side of the with education, you have the people who are in favour of behaviour management. You have some who favour the relationship approach, being like, don't be so harsh on the kids, just build relationships with them, and then they'll
Mm,
behave. But I think both of them have a role, but they're definitely not sufficient. I think there could be much more proactively nurturing certain values and virtues in students about sort of kindness and gratitude and respect in a sort of meaningful way, so that students have and have to care about them, know what they are, and when a teacher refers to them about the importance of being kind, it actually has meaning because it's part of the school culture, rather than the teacher just saying it in a slightly sort of arbitrary way that they
mhm.
can't relate to. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it has to be about more than that. And I thought it was interesting that you say it shouldn't sort of be a tit for tat. So,
yeah,
sir, I'll get my homework done if I can get 10 merits kind of thing. That can be
yeah,
problematic in itself. And that doesn't prepare, students and young people to invest in a community when they leave school.
yeah. You really want that intrinsic motivation, which I'd say is a feature of flourishing students, whether you know as people in terms of how they are and how they treat other people, but also academically. I think that intrinsic motivation is really important.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you speak on a lot is the importance of gratitude,
Yeah.
and how you try to inspire that with your pupils. So can you tell us a bit more about how you've done that in school and how that's been for you?
Yeah, so gratitude, sort of role models is aware of how valuable it is, both for your own well-being, if you give gratitude, the kind of chemical hit of happiness you get, but also what the recipient gets from it. And it's, gratitude's so great for nurturing individual relationships and also community relationships. And, the research is very clear that the single biggest determinant of your happiness is relationships. So it's hugely valuable. And I think you nurture it, um, gratitude, by explicitly encouraging it and putting mechanisms in place to actually make it happen. So I've done some things where in a week we might sort of focus on gratitude explicitly, and students might write thank you cards, or they can't do write thank you cards to a teacher or staff member in the school. Students speak in assembly about what they're grateful for. It can be very like incredibly moving when your sort of naughty year 10 boy is saying how he's grateful to his mum and his head of year.
Don't.
Um, and kids are help to say thank you to teachers on, say, at the end of a lesson, for example. So those kind of things, it helps the community, it helps relationships, it helps school culture.
Mhm. I think that's a really a lovely idea for teachers, and I love the way you said you can explicitly promote this by giving
Yeah,
them the actual opportunity. Here is a card. Go ahead
and
and write it and practice it, and then if they've done it once, they're more likely to do it again.
yeah, indeed. And some of the students I work with haven't had the opportunity to write on an envelope before. So it's, as I said, it's good for the recipient, but it's good for them. So they should deserve to have that opportunity as well.
Absolutely. And on that vein, do you feel like in order to develop a habit like gratitude, a skill like manifesting gratitude in your life, we this one of our key skills, for example, is resilience. Do you feel that
Yeah.
you need an opportunity to explicitly strengthen that skill and practice that skill in isolation to get better at it?
So as a new feeling gratitude in isolation rather than necessarily about being like giving gratitude, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I feel like what you do, and when you mentioned how you've embedded gratitude in your school culture, you've done that actively. I think a lot of
Yeah.
I think maybe reflecting on my own teaching experience, I would tell kids about things, and want them to be inspired by it, but until they've experienced, like you said, that hit themselves,
Yeah.
they don't get a chance to really understand it and put it into practice, I guess.
Yeah, I think, you kindly said that I'd embedded the kind of gratitude to my school culture. I think, like, I made a little bit of a input into that school culture. I'm not sure it's sort of embedded in quite the way I'd like it to be, but we're sort of gradually getting there. And the point is that if you explicitly do it a bit, then it becomes more of a habit. But as you know, it's not necessarily a habit for some people, but that doesn't mean it can't be a habit.
Hmm.
And that's where it comes into that sort of intentionality of schools thinking about nurturing these things that are good for the student and good for the community.
Definitely.
Um, and the point, if you do a bit of compulsion with it, as you give them the letter, then they're more likely to then do it. We gave one kid a letter recent, and then the following week he wrote an email of his own bat. I think it's interesting as well that link between gratitude and resilience. I think if you notice good things in your life, and good people in your life, that also can help with your resilience. I think there's two parts of gratitude, right? It's the expression of gratitude, and it's the actual feeling and noticing of the positives.
Hmm. Totally. Yeah, and that idea of hunting the good. So
Yeah,
that's a big facet of resilience, where it's not, oh, I'm down in my luck and bad things are happening to me, in that catastrophizing state of mind. It's, here's where I'm at. I'm accepting of the present. This is, I'm going to find the good in this situation and take what I can from a failure, for example.
yeah, and the point is that sort of the context our kids operate in, say on social media or on their phones, is they are encouraged to catastrophize and focus on what they don't have. socially, materially, physically, and schools have a duty to students' well-being. So, and as Susan Lynn said, they're in a war with big tech companies for students' attention. So you use the time, that precious time when they're in school, not on their devices, to give them resources and capacity to notice things and get into the habit of noticing things.
Hmm. I think that's a really interesting point that you make. School is one of those tiny bits of time in their day and maybe in their lives when they aren't on their phones and they have that moment to connect. That's so important, especially for a lot of kids that might not get that when they leave the building.
Yeah, exactly.
Really nice. So, final question. At Role Models, we focus our learning for young people around four key skills, and those are resilience, leadership, collaboration, and creative problem solving. And we teach 5-day courses, 5-day intensive courses around these skills. And if you could go back as a young person between, what are our age groups, 5 to 13, what course would you choose to do? What skill would you want to improve upon, and why, out of those four?
So resilience, leadership,
Collaboration and
collaboration.
creative problem solving.
I'd probably start with resilience. I think is the foundation, because to be a leader, to be resilient, solving problems can be challenging, and when you're collaborating with people, you might need to be resilient because you might be collaborating with people you don't particularly like. So you've got to be resilient in that context. But yeah, I think resilience is found is really essential early on, especially in this coddling of arguably coddling of people, of young people in particular. There's not many sort of Spartanagogis. Have you heard of that?
No.
Have you seen the film 300?
Okay, yeah,
Where
I've
they
heard of
like
it.
where basically Spartans used to like shove someone, like a young person, into the wild for like a few weeks, and the idea being that if they can like survive in the wild, then they're ready to move on to the next phase of like adulthood. Apologies to any ancient historians who have I've completely bastardized the description of that process. I probably mispronounced it as well, but there's something in there, isn't there?
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I think again for parents that's probably the course that they want to start their kids on first. Like,
yeah,
let's
that
time
makes
for
sense.
some tough love. I love
But it's a great mixture
that. Hmm.
of four.
So just before we finish off, what or how can our listeners get in touch with you, or read some of your writing, find out a bit more about your work, Adam?
So probably just go to my Twitter handle, which is Adam capital J Seldon. I'm not sure what I thought I was doing there with the capital J between Adam and Seldon. As we made it a fair few years ago now, but that's what it is. So we'll stick with it. And yeah, there's links to things I occasionally write on there, and yeah, I'm doing a sort of project on the side called Around the World in 80 Schools, where I visit schools, in a range of cultures and contexts. And it's definitely the case that a consistent feature of some of the great schools that I've had the privilege to visit is that they do some explicit nurturing of character.
That's incredible. And within that, you're traveling with that? Like, you actually are going around the world?
Yeah, well, I think I'm still a full-time teacher, so I think I've in the last couple of years I've just kind of gradually visited schools, a few in the UK and a few abroad.
Oh, I love that.
So we're getting to 80 very gradually. Yeah,
Stay tuned.
yeah. Stay tuned. It might be 38 till we get to the 80, but yeah, watch out.
I love that. That's fascinating. Well, Adam, it's been really excellent to have you on today. Thank you so much for your time and for your ideas.
Thank you for having me. It's been really good to chat, and role models do great work, so it's great to find out a bit what you guys do as well.
Amazing. For anyone that is interested in finding out a bit more about what Adam does, I will put the Twitter handle with the capital J in the show notes, along with a few other links, so you can find all that on there.